Over 3 million children in the United States are currently being homeschooled, and that number has more than doubled since the year 2000. But here is the part that stops most people cold: homeschooled students consistently outperform their traditionally schooled peers on standardized tests by an average of 15 to 30 percentile points. That is not a small gap. That is not a rounding error. That is a fundamental difference in educational outcomes that the mainstream conversation almost completely ignores. In the next 10 minutes, you are going to discover exactly how homeschooling stacks up against traditional education across academics, socialization, cost, flexibility, and long-term outcomes. You will learn what the research actually says, not what either side wants you to believe. And there is one finding buried deep in the data that completely flips the most common argument against homeschooling on its head. Most people assume they already know what it is. Almost everyone is wrong. To understand where we are today, you have to understand where this all began. Formal schooling, as most people recognize it, structured classrooms, standardized curriculum, age-based grade levels, became the norm in the United States only in the mid-1800s. Before that, learning happened in homes, in apprenticeships, and in small community settings. Horace Mann, often called the father of American public education, championed the idea of state-funded common schools in the 1840s, arguing that a democratic society needed a uniformly educated population. His vision transformed the country. By the early 20th century, compulsory education laws existed in every state. Homeschooling, despite what many people assume, is not a modern rebellion against this system. It is actually the older model. What changed in the 1970s and 1980s was that a growing number of families began formally choosing home education over the public school system, often for religious or philosophical reasons. Educator John Holt became one of the most influential voices of the modern homeschooling movement, arguing that traditional schools stifled natural curiosity. By 1993, homeschooling was legal in all 50 states. And the movement has never stopped growing. Now let us get into the academics, because this is where the data gets genuinely fascinating. Multiple large-scale studies have examined how homeschooled students perform compared to their traditionally schooled peers. A study published in the Journal of College Admission found that homeschooled students scored an average of 72 points higher on the SAT than the national average. Another study by Dr. Brian Ray of the National Home Education Research Institute tracked over 11,000 homeschooled students and found they scored between 15 and 30 percentile points above public school students on standardized academic achievement tests. These results held regardless of whether parents had teaching credentials, regardless of household income, and regardless of how much the state regulated the homeschooling curriculum. But here's what nobody talks about: the gap is not explained by money. Wealthier families do tend to homeschool at higher rates, but when researchers controlled for socioeconomic status, the academic advantage of homeschooling largely remained. Something about the model itself, the one-on-one instruction, the personalized pacing, the removal of classroom distractions, appears to drive better outcomes independent of resources. Traditional schools, by contrast, operate on an industrial model. A single teacher manages 25 to 30 students simultaneously, delivering content at a pace designed for the average learner. Students who grasp concepts quickly sit and wait. Students who need more time fall behind. The system was never designed for individualization. It was designed for scale. That distinction matters enormously when you are talking about academic outcomes. What about socialization? This is the argument you hear constantly, that homeschooled kids are isolated, awkward, and socially underdeveloped. It is also one of the most persistent myths in the education debate. Research simply does not support it. Studies consistently find that homeschooled students participate in just as many extracurricular activities as their traditionally schooled peers, including sports teams, music programs, community theater, and cooperative learning groups specifically designed for homeschool families. A 2009 study published in the Canadian Journal of Behavioral Science found that homeschooled children actually scored higher on measures of social maturity and civic involvement than their public school counterparts. The nature of socialization is also worth examining more carefully. Traditional schools expose children to one very specific social environment, a room full of age-matched peers, organized by adults, for 6 to 8 hours a day. This is, when you think about it, a fairly artificial construct. Very few situations in adult life resemble this setup. Homeschooled children, by contrast, often interact with people of multiple ages, engage with their communities, and learn to navigate different social contexts throughout the week. Whether that makes for better or worse social development depends heavily on how you define the goal. Now let us talk about cost, because this is a real and significant factor that any honest comparison has to address. Traditional public education is free at the point of use, funded by taxpayers. Homeschooling is not. Families who homeschool are paying property taxes that support the public schools their children do not attend, while simultaneously funding their own educational materials, curriculum packages, co-op fees, and extracurricular activities. The average homeschooling family spends between $500 and $2,500 per year on educational expenses, depending on their approach. Some families spend far more. And that calculation does not include the opportunity cost of a parent leaving the workforce or reducing hours to manage the education. This is a genuine equity issue. The academic benefits of homeschooling are real, but access to those benefits is not evenly distributed. Single-parent households, families where all adults must work full-time, and families without the educational background to feel confident teaching are all at a structural disadvantage. This is something homeschooling advocates do not always acknowledge clearly enough. Traditional schools also provide services that homeschooling typically cannot replicate as easily: access to speech therapists, occupational therapists, counselors, special education specialists, and peer-based programs for students with learning differences. For families of children with complex needs, this consideration can be decisive. But here is what the deeper research reveals when you look at long-term outcomes. A 2010 study tracking homeschool graduates into adulthood found that they were more likely to attend college, more likely to graduate from college, and more likely to be civically engaged, voting, volunteering, and participating in community organizations at higher rates than the general population. A separate survey of college admissions officers found that many actively sought out homeschool graduates because of their self-direction, their ability to work independently, and their intellectual curiosity. These are not soft, unmeasurable qualities. They show up in graduation rates and career outcomes. The flexibility of homeschooling also produces something that traditional education rarely can: true personalization of the learning timeline. A 12-year-old who is passionate about marine biology can spend 3 hours a day on science while moving at a slower pace through areas of less natural interest. A child who learns to read later than average does not carry the social stigma of being held back a grade. A teenager who wants to start a small business or pursue a competitive athletic career can structure education around that goal rather than treating it as a distraction from it. Traditional education, to its credit, offers consistency, accountability structures, qualified credentialed teachers in specialized subjects, and a shared cultural experience that unites students across different backgrounds. These are not nothing. They are genuinely valuable. The question is whether the benefits of the traditional model outweigh its limitations for any particular child in any particular family situation. The honest answer, supported by the evidence, is that neither model is universally superior. What the research shows clearly is that high-quality homeschooling produces strong academic and developmental outcomes, often stronger than the traditional alternative. But high-quality homeschooling requires commitment, resources, intentionality, and a degree of parental involvement that is not realistic for every family. Meanwhile, traditional schools remain indispensable for millions of children who benefit from their structure, their social environment, and the specialized services they provide. The most important takeaway from all of this data is not that one system wins. It is that educational outcomes are deeply shaped by the match between a child's learning needs and the environment they are placed in. Before you go, if you learned something valuable today, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Brain Boost Academy for a brand new video every single day. We will see you in the next one.